Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, if you've been watching the job market lately, you already know that making the leap from the classroom to the cubicle, or, the home office, is honestly more turbulent than ever before. Today, we're taking a really structured deep dive into the startling reality of this transition. We're going to look directly at the data to unpack the psychological, the financial, and the structural hurdles that today's fresh graduates are running into. So, why is landing your first job harder than ever? It's a question that literally haunts millions of recent grads. Think about it. You spend years grinding for a degree, totally driven by the dream of this shiny new career, only to smack face first into a pretty jarring reality. Instead of mentorship and growth, a lot of people just find entry-level burnout, structural inequity, and a system that feels like it's built to test your resilience way before it ever actually rewards your talent. To unpack all of this, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the school-to-work transition, then look at the unpaid internship trap, the early career wage gap, discrimination at the entry level, burnout and remote isolation, and finally, fixing the fresher experience. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the school-to-work transition. Okay, so the absolute first hurdle is just crossing that threshold from student to professional. In academic literature, they call this newcomer adjustment. It's basically the intense process of navigating the clash between your personal life and a whole new set of organizational demands. I mean, think about it. For over a decade, you're used to these highly structured environments, right? Clear syllabi, predictable deadlines, constant feedback loops from teachers, and then boom, you are thrust into corporate ambiguity. Adapting to new teams and finding job satisfaction in that kind of environment isn't just a learning curve, it's a massive psychological shift that really takes a toll on young adult mental health. But before they even get to that adjustment phase, they hit a massive wall. The data clearly shows that a lack of work experience and intense competition are the absolute hardest challenges in the job hunt. It is the classic catch-22. Even with specialized degrees, freshers are facing this intense competition and are routinely rejected because they lack the exact experience they're desperately trying to gain. Make it make sense, right? Section 2, the unpaid internship trap. Since freshers need that initial experience just to get a foot in the door, so many are forced right into unpaid roles. This quote from a study on legal interns in India really lays the reality bare. When interns perform substantial and productive work without compensation, it blurs the line between training and labor, potentially leading to indirect exploitation. We're talking about young professionals bearing intense mental strain from tight deadlines and endless workloads, but with zero financial recognition. And without a paycheck to cover basic things like travel or food, the financial pressure makes it nearly impossible to sustain long-term. It essentially prices out anyone who doesn't have strong family financial backing. And what's even worse is the silent exploitation happening completely in the shadows. Interns are frequently excluded from basic legal labor protections. For instance, in India, they fall completely outside the purview of the Code on Social Security and the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code. Because they exist in this weird regulatory gap, they're left totally vulnerable, without any of the fundamental safety nets that regular employees just take for granted. Section 3, the early career wage gap. So what happens when you finally do land a paying role? Well, systemic inequities kick in almost immediately. And look, the data shows that freshers aren't entering the market with these wild, unrealistic demands. Over 45% of fresh graduates expect a very modest starting salary, somewhere between 4 to 8 lakhs. But despite those realistic expectations, the actual compensation freshers receive is very often skewed by hidden systemic issues right from the second they get that offer letter. To put that into perspective, according to a Korn Ferry study of 1.7 million college graduates, the gender pay gap can yawn as wide as 55% for some degree holders just 3 years after graduation. 3 years! That means before parenthood or major life changes even enter the equation, early career women are already falling vastly behind their male counterparts who hold the exact same degrees. 55%. That is wild. So how does this early career inequity snowball so fast? Well, part of it is driven by initial field choices. Statistically, men are more likely to enter higher-paying fields like engineering or tech, while women traditionally lean toward fields like HR or marketing. But the real hidden danger? That lies in subjective, non-salary compensation at the end of the year. Things like bonuses, equity grants, and entry-level raises are absolute hotbeds of subjectivity. Over time, these practices quietly create a two-tier system, putting a lot of young women on a financial dead-end path right out of the gate. Section 4, discrimination at the entry level. These inequities actually go way beyond just finances. They compound into social and structural discrimination within the workplace itself.
To really understand this, we need to look at vulnerability theory. This is grounded in a recent study of the Malaysian retail sector, and it explains that individuals are embedded in social institutions that make certain groups fundamentally more susceptible to discrimination. Basically, it tells us that young women in entry-level, low-paid jobs are particularly at risk just because of the power dynamics inherent in these early career positions.
The specific drivers here are pretty clear: economic compulsion, organizational injustice, stereotyping, and perceived societal discrimination. And a lot of times this discrimination isn't even deliberate. It's accidental. Accidental discrimination happens when cultural stereotypes just seep into daily practices. For example, severe racial bias still very much exists in hiring. Candidates with ethnic-sounding names are significantly less likely to get callbacks compared to those with white-sounding names, even if their resumes are identical. For marginalized entry-level workers, the pressure to just keep their jobs forces them to endure these biases, which just leaves them in this constant state of high vulnerability.
Section 5. Burnout and remote isolation.
Okay, so you've landed the job, you've navigated the wage gaps, you've dealt with workplace biases. Now let's look at the daily psychological grind. Data from the Indian IT sector reveals a really stark contrast across the corporate hierarchy. Look at this. Senior leadership experiences high inclusion and low burnout. Meanwhile, entry-level workers are facing the exact opposite. They have incredibly low inclusion and engagement, paired with massive burnout and really high turnover intentions. Think about that. The people who are newest to the organization, the ones who need the most support, are actually the ones most actively burning out and looking to leave.
And honestly, the modern remote work environment is just exacerbating this. Research from MIT and the University of Michigan highlights a massive divide. In-person work actually makes teams up to 3 times more collaborative, and physical connection actually improves mental functioning. Remote work, on the flip side, makes it incredibly difficult to create any kind of shared identity. And casual workplace friendships, those are absolutely vital for successful newcomer adjustment. Plus, remote isolation breeds proximity bias. That's this subconscious tendency for leadership to favor the workers they actually physically see in the office for promotions and prime projects. It basically leaves remote freshers stranded on these digital and career islands.
Section 6. Fixing the fresher experience. Now, the picture we painted today is tough, for sure, but it is absolutely not unfixable. Based directly on the research, here are the 3 vital interventions HR leaders need to make. First, implement structured mentorship programs. Freshers simply cannot survive on ambiguity. They need clear, consistent guidance to reduce that burnout. Second, conduct formal pay equity assessments. You cannot fix an early career wage gap if you aren't tracking the data to ensure starting offers are standardized. And third, design targeted diversity and inclusion policies that actively protect the most vulnerable entry-level workers from accidental stereotyping and bias. We've seen that the transition from school to work is fraught with structural inequity, psychological strain, and all these invisible barriers, which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought, especially for the organizational leaders watching. If the future of your company entirely depends on the success of today's freshers, what are you doing to fix their starting line? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next one.